All right, so everyone seems to be enjoying the summer movie series of tutorials here on Planet, and we're going to continue on this week with Ice Age. The new Ice Age movie opens up, and I was trying to decide what aspect of the movie to do as a tutorial, and I went over to Twitter to get some help, and I got a lot of good suggestions, but ultimately, and I almost wasn't even going to do a movie tutorial this week because it didn't seem like anything was really interesting. But I have to thank somebody over at Twitter called Design for Fun actually gave me a good idea of doing a tutorial on Ice Age, and we're going to do a kind of an illustrated thing here. Because up till now, we've done some text effects and some photo manipulation, but we haven't really done anything from a completely illustrated look. Well, we did do the up balloon, but that was kind of simple in its application. And here we're going to get a little bit more involved and illustrate the Acorn that is made so famous by the little Scrat character from the trailers and in the movie and such. And it's a good use of creating textures and other various techniques like that inside Photoshop. So we're going to begin with a blank document here. And I'm going in here to my layers panel, create a new blank layer. And we're going to go over here into the toolbar and grab our rectangular marquee tool right in here. And right inside the document, I'm going to hold down my shift key and just draw out a perfectly square box here. Right in the center of the canvas there. Now again, on that empty layer, we're going to go ahead and fill this with a color. I'm going to grab this light color swatch inside of my swatches panel, simply press Option Delete, and it fills it in. And keeping that selection active, we're going to go and create another blank layer right above that one. And let's go ahead and set our foreground and background colors to their default color. Simply press the D key on my keyboard. And we're going to go under filter this time. Of course, before we apply the filter, we have to give this a color fill. So I'm going to go ahead and press Shift Delete and just give this a base gray fill here using 50% gray. And then go under the filter menu to render and choose fibers. Now inside here, I'm just going to use the default setting as you see right here, the variance at 16 and the strength at 4. And you can certainly click randomize to redistribute the fibers any way you like. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. Let's actually go ahead and do that one more. There, that looks good. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to go ahead and deselect. Press Command D. Now we're going to go in the Layers panel and just click on this icon at right above the layer and lock the transparency. Then let's go under the Filter menu, go to Blur, and choose Motion Blur. Now inside here, you're going to set the angle to 90 degrees, and the distance you want to set really high, about 430. Looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and click OK on that one. Now I want to blend it with the color layer underneath by simply going into the Blend Mode menu and choosing Soft Light. And it blends it in nicely. Now if it looks a little too intense, you can always drop the opacity. In this case, I'm going to drop it down to about 70%. Looks pretty good. Now, once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and merge these two layers together by simply pressing Command E on my keyboard, and it will merge those layers down. So we still have it contained on its own layer. Go in here, I'm going to press Command T to invoke the free transform, and I'm going to control or right click right on the object, and inside the menu here we're going to choose Warp. Now starting here at the bottom, we're going to grab these outside handles and just push them toward the center bottom here, and this will start to take shape as our acorn here, as you can see. Pushing that up, nudge these areas down a little bit. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and control or right click on this object once more, and this time choose Freeze Transform and just squash this down a little bit. So it looks like the base of our acorn. So let's just nudge that down a little bit. Looking pretty good. Now let's go ahead and create a new blank layer above that one. And again, I'm going to go into the toolbar and grab the rectangular marquee tool. And in here, I'm just going to draw a very long rectangular shape, not the same square shape we did, but a longer rectangular shape. This is going to be the cap of our acorn here. So again, on that blank layer, inside of that selection, I'm just going to give this a base color fill. And this time, we're actually going to use a color instead of gray. We're going to use that same color we used for the fill of the acorn, which was that color swatch right here. Now, I am going to make that a little bit darker, perhaps even a little redder there. There we go. And inside that selection, I'm simply going to press Option Delete, and it fills it in. Now let's go ahead and deselect. Again, like before, we're going to go in here and lock the transparency. And what we want to do is apply a filter. Now, before I do that, we want to make this brown color that we used a little bit darker than the one we used for the fill. So let's go into that swatch and just nudge this down a little bit, making it a little bit darker. That looks good. So now let's go into the filter menu and go to texture and choose stained glass. And you can see we've got the cell size set to about 23, and the border thickness is relatively high, around 13. If we take it down lower, you see it's about what stained glass should look like. But we're not using it to create a stained glass look here. We're actually using it to create the notched look of the cap of our Acorn here. So put that right about there and click OK. So now I'm going to go over here and grab the Magic Wand tool, and up here in the options bar, make sure that the contiguous is unchecked. Normally it would be checked on by default, but go ahead and uncheck that, and then click any one of the lighter colors or lighter brown areas inside of this shape. And what it will do is select all of the other areas that are the same color, even if they're not attached. So actually go in here and make this color a little bit darker. And with that selection active, we're going to go under the edit menu, go down here to stroke. And inside here, we're going to set the stroke width to about 4 pixels. And there's the color. Location set to the inside, and all the blending is set to normal. It looks good. And we'll go ahead and click OK. Now, before we deselect, let's go into the filter menu and give this a tiny bit of a blur. Go under blur to Gaussian blur, and about a 3 pixel blur. Actually, let's do about a 2. So it softens those edges so they're not so harsh right in there. So now I'm going to press Command T to start the free transform, and let's control or right click on that object, and again like before we're going to choose warp. And now let's manipulate this shape to roughly the shape of the cap of our Acorn here. So just push these handles around, nudge those. This is the beauty of warp, is that you can create a base shape in a very two-dimensional space and then manipulate it after the fact, just like we're doing here. So that looks like it might work, so we'll go ahead and press enter. So now we've got what looks like the cap of our Acorns coming together. Well, now what I'm going to do is give this a little bit of shading. I'm going to select that base, the original shape on the bottom here, and let's go ahead and grab the burn tool. And I'm going to set my brush pretty high, soft edge brush, range up here set to midtones, and let's set the exposure down to about 25%. And I'm just going to go in here and just give this some shading. A little bit harsher right at the edge here where it meets the cap because it needs to be a lot more like a shadow. And I'm going to have my lighting direction coming from over here, so we'll just have the shadow kind of going in here, maybe a little bit of shading here, but pretty harsh under there. Let's select the cap and give it the similar shading. So it's gonna enhance the dimension a little bit more just by enhancing this shading. And let's go in here and grab the dodge tool and do very much the same thing, but this time for the highlights. So we're gonna go in here and make that brush pretty big, and we'll enhance the highlights here on this. Select the bottom layer, give it some lighting there. Really coming together. Now, let's just nudge that shape over a little bit. Now again, the beauty of these is that they are on their own layer still, so we can manipulate the shapes a little bit if we want. Just like that. Can even nudge that up a little bit. Now, I want to give this top part a little bit more dimension, and for that matter, I want to give the bottom part a little bit more dimension. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to control or command click right on that layer that contains the cap and load it as a selection. Just click right on the layer icon there. And then copy this area to the clipboard. Let's go under Edit, go to Copy, go to the channels, and create a new alpha channel. Notice the selection is still active. Then we're going to go under the Edit menu and choose Paste. So now that area is now inside an alpha channel, ready for us to apply an effect. So let's go back to our layers. On that same layer, go into the filter menu, go to Render, and choose Lighting Effects. And right in here, like I said, we're going to put the direction of the light in the upper left area here, as you see. But down here in the texture channel, we're going to go into that menu and choose Alpha 1, which contains that area of the cap. And by increasing the setting here to about 75, it's going to use that alpha channel to build dimension. It's going to give it some depth by embossing it to a certain degree. So when I click OK, watch what happens. See how much more dimension it got there? So that's looking really cool. Again, let's do the same thing to the bottom area. Let's load that as a selection. Copy it to the clipboard. New alpha channel. Selection still active, or simply under edit, paste. There it is in my channels. Let's go back into the layers. On that particular layer, again, filter, render lighting effects, and then simply choose that alpha 2. And let's, in this case, drop the setting here to about 25. So it's not as extreme as it was before. So we'll click OK, and it gives that area a little bit more dimension. It's not so flat anymore. It looked good before, but now it looks a whole lot better. So now that's looking good. Now we have to add the stem. So let's go ahead and create a new blank layer. And I'm simply going to grab my lasso tool, and right up here towards the top, let's just draw. In fact, let's take this all and nudge it down a little bit, so we have room for it. And again, selecting on that blank layer, notice I've got it in between these two layers, so it appears to be behind this. So I'm just going to draw that stem out, just like that. Now let's go ahead and give it a fill. I'm just going to use that same brown we've got in the color right there. And again, I'm going to grab that dodge tool, going for a very small brush. I'm just using my left bracket key and just nudging this down very small, and just give this a little bit of highlights. A little bit up top there, a little bit on the sides. It's just going to help that dimension of that shape a little bit more. Looks pretty good. Now, could spend a great deal of time on that, but I think you get the idea. Now, I want to get back to this cap here. Now, it looks good, and it's got dimension and everything like that. The problem is the edges are too perfect. Notice how it's just got a clean edge all the way around. You know, a real thing wouldn't really look like that. So let's go into select that layer, go into the filter menu, and go to liquify. And inside here, let's give this a zoom in a little bit. We're going to use the very first tool up here, one at the top, the forward warp tool, relatively small brush, notice you're saying, and then go into where each one of these little notches are. Let's make that brush a little bit bigger. Into where each one of these notches are, and just give it a little push in. And that will give it a little bit more realism. So those edges aren't so clean all the way around, you know, because the real thing wouldn't really look like that. It'll have little notches in there, and that just increases the dimension of this object that much more by adding that little element. Notice the difference. Now it has a little bit more dimension as it goes around in space there. So when I click OK, so notice what we've got there. Big difference. Looks pretty good. So now, let's just finish this up by maybe perhaps making it look like it's sitting in the snow. So let's go in here and select that bottom layer. And let's take the lasso tool and draw a little selection here, just like that. So I'm going to hide that area. So on that layer, I'm going to hold down my Option key and click on the layer mask. And it hides it. Looks like it's sitting right inside there. But I'm also going to reload that selection. I'm just going to command click right on the layer mask, as you can see right there. And now I'm going to inverse that selection because I want this area inside of here to be selected. So let's go under Select, Inverse. And we're going to again grab, we could use the brush tool, but I think I'm just going to use the burn tool right here. And up here in the options, set the range to highlights. And we'll select the bottom layer, the base layer here that contains just a white fill, and just give this a little bit of dimension here by painting in that area there. If I deselect, notice what it gives me. So it has a little bit more dimension like it's sitting there. So let's do one more thing. I'm going to load all three of these layers as a selection. I'm going to command click on that first layer, and then command and the shift key on the next two layers to add to that selection. Now, let's create a new blank layer right above here. And I'm going to give it a shadow color, but I'm not going to do black because in the snow, shadows appear to have more of a blue tinge to them. So let's go over here and give this kind of a darker blue look to it. There we go. So I'm going to Option Delete and fill that selection in. I'm going to press Command T and let's transform this. I'm going to Control or right click right on that object and let's go to Distort. And I'm going to grab this top middle handle here and just give us a push down. And we'll nudge that right about there. And we'll give that and just press Enter to commit that change. And then finally, let's go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Give it a pretty big blur at about 10 pixels. And we'll click OK. Simply drop the opacity of that down. And perhaps one last final thing. Let's hold down the Shift key and select all the layers that contain just the Acorn elements, not the shadows. And again, press Command T, and let's just give it a little bit of a turn. Now, notice that that mask is moving with it. Before I do that, I'm going to unlink the layer mask. So when I select these 3 layers and go to transform them, the layer mask will stay put. Notice that the masking is staying in place. So now it looks like the acorn is just kind of sitting there in the snow, waiting for our little friend to come and claim it. So there it is. Cool techniques of creating textures and using lighting effects to create depth, all right there inside Photoshop. So there you have it. Hope you enjoy the movie. Hope you enjoy the tutorial, and we'll see you next time.